Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a really significant 1994 Supreme Court judgment from India. F.R. Bommai versus Union of India.
Yes, this one fundamentally reshaped, or at least clarified, India's federal structure. It took a hard look at the president's power under Article 356.
That's the one allowing presidents rule in states, right? A power that, well, the Constitution's framers kind of hoped would just sit there, unused.
A dead letter.
Exactly. But it was used a lot. This case really tried to, put some boundaries around that power, rebalancing things between the union and the states.
It seems like the core mission here was to understand how the court stepped in to guard the Constitution.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating because, think about it, Article 356 was meant for exceptional circumstances, a real breakdown, not as a routine political tool.
Yet it had been used, over 90 times before this judgment?
That's the figure often cited. So the Supreme Court really had its work cut out to rein that in. Okay, so let's get into the verdict itself. How did the court start building these safeguards? The big one seems to be judicial review.
They made it crystal clear. The president's proclamation under Article 356 can be reviewed by the courts. It's not off limits.
So this wasn't just a minor change. It really shifted the power dynamic, didn't it?
Oh, completely. The courts could now examine if the president's satisfaction, which really means the union government's satisfaction, was based on, actual relevant material.
And crucially, whether it was driven by malified intentions, bad faith.
Right. But it's important the court wasn't saying it would judge the correctness of the decision itself or how much material there was.
Ah, okay. So more about the process.
Exactly. The manner in which the decision was reached. Was it based on something relevant? Was it honest? That's what they'd scrutinize. It's a check on arbitrary power.
So the court looks at how decisions are made. And then there's this other massive piece, the mandatory floor test. Tell us about that.
This was huge. The court essentially said, look, if you want to know if a state government has a majority, you test it on the floor of the Legislative Assembly, period.
No more the governor just sort of assessing the situation subjectively.
Precisely. The proof is in the pudding, or rather in the votes inside the Assembly. That protects elected governments from being dismissed arbitrarily.
Unless there were really extreme circumstances, like widespread violence preventing the Assembly from even meeting, I suppose?
Yes, they allowed for truly extraordinary situations. But the default, the absolute rule, became the floor test. It empowers the legislature.
Yet alongside these procedural checks, the court hammered home a point about secularism.
Yes, very firmly. It declared secularism a basic feature of the Constitution.
What does that mean in practice for a state government?
It means the state has to be neutral regarding religion. Any action by a state government that goes against this principle, that action is unconstitutional. It reinforced a core value.
Okay, so we have judicial review of the process, the mandatory floor test, and secularism as a basic feature. What about the information used to justify president's rule?
Right. So there's Article 74, Clause 2, which says courts can't inquire into the actual advice ministers give the president.
So the executive could potentially hide behind that.
Well, that's what the court tackled. They said, okay, we can't look at the advice itself, but we can look at the material on which that advice was based.
The evidence, the reports, whatever it was.
Exactly. If the decision is challenged, the union government has to produce that material to justify its action. They can't just say, based on advice, full stop.
That's a critical distinction. So how did this Bommai judgment compare to what came before? Was this a big leap?
A massive leap, especially compared to the 1977 State of Rajasthan case, which had taken a much more limited view of judicial review in this area.
What changed to allow for this expansion?
A key factor was the 44th Amendment to the Constitution. It had actually deleted a clause, Clause 5 of Article 356, which had previously said the president's satisfaction was final and conclusive.
So that specific barrier to judicial review was already gone.
Yes, the amendment removed that explicit bar, clearing the path. Bommai then walked through that open door and really defined the extent of the review.
And the court actually applied these principles to specific instances of president's rule during the case, right?
It did. It looked back at several. For instance, the dismissals in Karnataka in '89 and Nagaland in '88 were found invalid.
Why? What went wrong there?
Often it was because the governors didn't allow a floor test when they should have, or they acted too quickly, maybe didn't follow court directions properly.
And there were others too, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Himachal Pradesh.
Yes, those dismissals in 1992 were examined, particularly through that lens of secularism we talked about, linked to events around the Ayodhya dispute at the time. The court looked at whether state actions or inactions were consistent with constitutional secularism.
So even though in these specific cases, elections had already happened and the old governments couldn't just be put back.
Right. Practical realities meant restoration wasn't possible then. But the judgment was crucial for the future.
How so?
It established clear guidelines, and importantly, it affirmed that if a proclamation imposing president's rule is found invalid by a court, the dissolved assembly and the dismissed ministry could theoretically be restored.
Wow, so it has real teeth? It's not just a slap on the wrist?
Not at all. It serves as a powerful deterrent against the misuse of Article 356. It strongly reinforces federalism, democracy, by limiting that arbitrary central power.
So this deep dive into S.R. Bommai really highlights this ongoing tension, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This constant balancing act India faces.
Definitely. How do you maintain a strong center, which maybe you need for unity, but also respect the autonomy and democratic mandates of diverse states?
Especially, when raw politics bumps up against these high constitutional ideals, it leaves you wondering how that balance continues to be negotiated day to day.